Welcome to Behind the Mic with AudioFile magazine, where listeners come for audiobook recommendations. I'm Michele Cobb, and we're celebrating AudioFile selections for Best Audiobooks of 2024. Today, we're talking about multi-voice selections, and Golden Voice narrator Edoardo Ballerini will be here to join us. But first, let me take you through AudioFile selections for Best Multi-Voice Audiobooks of 2024. George Orwell's 1984 by George Orwell, adapted by Joe White. Starring Andrew Garfield, Cynthia Erivo, Andrew Scott, Tom Hardy, Chukwudi Iwuji, Romesh, Ranganathan, Natasia, Demetriou, Francesca Miles, Alex Lawther, and Katie Leung. How Women Made Music by Ellison Fensterstock, editor, with an intro by Ann Powers from National Public Radio. Read by Ellison Fensterstock, Ann Powers et al. Journey's End by R.C. Sheriff, starring James Callis, Josh Cole, Jack Cutmore Scott, Tobias H. Areva, Adam Godley, Ian Ogilvy, Darren Richardson, Simon Templeman, and Matthew Wolfe. Moon Called by Patricia Briggs, read by Kiaya Freites, Gregory Linnington, Christopher McLinden, Rainer Gabriel, Chris Stinson, Renee Dorian, and a full cast. Dangerous Visions with Harlan Ellison, editor, read by Mara Wilson, Jim Meskimen, Simon Vance, Stephen J. Cohen, Johnny Heller, Edoardo Ballerini, Dion Graham, et al. And When the Sea Came Alive, An Oral History of D-Day by Garrett M. Graff, editor, read by Edoardo Ballerini, the author, and a full cast. Wow, 2, Edoardo. Congratulations.
Thank you.
This was your category this year, I
I
guess.
guess it was. I need the support of others.
Well,
So,
and I need your support as I try to read through all those names. Whew,
right.
I'm glad I'm not an audiobook narrator. So tell us a little bit about When the Sea Came Alive, if you would.
So, When the Sea Came Alive, an oral history of D-Day is, as the title would suggest, an oral retelling of what was the largest seaborne invasion in history, known as D-Day, which is the turning point in World War II that secured the Allied victory over the Axis powers. And by the Axis powers, we're talking about Hitler's Nazi Germany. The book was compiled by Garrett M. Graff, an author and an historian of great renown. Garrett was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. He was a Pulitzer Prize finalist, I should say, for Watergate, New History. And so what we have here is a first-hand accounting of this extraordinary event in history. And as I was thinking about it, a lot of people have a vague sense of D-Day. And if you think about it, the term itself, D-Day, has become shorthand for any momentous occasion. But the specifics of the actual D-Day are truly remarkable. People don't quite realize what happened. So, months and months of planning went into this, and 150,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on the morning of June 6, 1944. And the result was saving the Western world from authoritarian rule in the second half of the 20th century. And it really came down to this one day. So what we have is this oral retelling of it. And I have to say, if ever there was a title that screamed out, "Let me be an audiobook," it's an oral history, which
Yes.
is exactly what we have with When the Sea Came Alive. And for listeners, this becomes a very rich, very immersive experience in a way that I don't think the print, as terrific as it is, could really ever achieve.
Well, you had 26 narrators performing 700 real life historical figures. So that's amazing in itself. I'm curious, how did you prepare and what sort of interaction did you have with your fellow narrators?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The book is 26 narrators playing, voicing 700 historical figures. So it's kind of like a drama being told through the eyes of those who experienced the days and weeks leading up to D-Day. So we're talking about soldiers, nurses, fighter pilots, sailors, politicians, photographers, reporters. Everybody is covered in this. So my role in this is that of the overarching narrator, the one sort of telling the story in interstitial snippets from start to finish, kind of like the for those who are old enough to get this reference, the Edward R. Murrow
Ah, yes.
yes, right, of the of the project. And then the parts themselves of these various people who I mentioned, we have an incredible cast doing that. But in some ways, I'm playing the role of author Garrett M. Graff. So my preparation was to listen to some old archival dispatches from the era,
Hmm.
and I had no intention of trying to sound like an old 1940s war correspondent or radio announcer. That would have been way too hokey. But I just wanted to have some of that feeling in my head. And you asked about interaction with other narrators. I did not have any. I don't know if they had interactions with each other, but I think when you're talking about a 26-person cast, we really have to give the lion's share of the credit to the director, who in this case is a man by the name of Scott Sherritt. And Scott's name may not be known to listeners, but he has put together some extraordinary books over the years. And in this case, we had narrators from all across the United States. There were people in England, there were people in France. And so Scott had to put this all together. And Garrett actually himself reads a few sections. He does the intro and the outro, and then a short section about the military jargon. And it's also worth noting that Garrett is very audio centric. He had another fantastic book, The
Hmm.
Only Plane in the Sky, which also had this sort of large cast, and he has this podcast called The Long Shadow. And so he was very involved in how this all came together. But I mean, the cast we had was wonderful. I mean, you don't have time to list them all, and neither do I. But like Simon Jones, who played Churchill on the West End, is part of this cast. Holter Graham, Saskia Marleveld, Eunice Wong, Graham Halstead, Kevin R. Free, Imogen Church. The list goes on and on. But to answer your question, I didn't have any interaction with the rest of the cast. And in my case, that might have been probably for the best to sort of stay apart from it.
Well, this is all very interesting information, and I found The Only Plane in the Sky has long been one of my favorite listens. So I was excited to see this one as well because it does help you get into the sense of it helps me kind of like step into the moment a little bit more
Right.
hearing it in audio.
Right, I agree. It becomes very alive. I'm just using the word from the title, but it does in fact become very alive in people's ears. And when you hear, this one snippet of a soldier talking, and then behind it is a snippet of a nurse talking, and all these different voices interacting, it creates this whole immersive experience, which again I don't think could have been done any other way.
Now, do you find any particular challenges when you are doing a multi-voice recording as compared to when it's just you on your own?
Yeah, I think with a multi-voice recording, what you want is that even overarching feel to the whole project. The last thing you want is for one voice to sound like it's coming from sort of one corner of the world, and I don't mean physically in the world, but I mean sort of style. Let's call it that. One kind of style over here and one kind of style over here, and then they don't really blend together. So I think the challenge is in making sure that even though you have, in this case, 26 different voices, that they all feel like they're in the same theater, that they're all working together. And again, I do think we have to give a lot of credit to Scott Sherritt for that, because he was the one overseeing and making sure, and also to Garrett, who had a hand in casting this and making sure that everybody was going to be the right person for the roles.
Yes, those are two incredible roles that you talk about. The director and the author being involved in that is always very important and exciting. And Scott has directed some very interesting works, including Bono's. So
Yeah, Scott is no slouch. He's worked
yeah.
with Bono and Prince Harry and Cher and a few others. So he was terrific. I've worked with Scott many times. We always have fun, and he was really making sure that every role was cast properly.
So immersing yourself in this work, has anything stayed with you about it?
Well, World War II is unfortunately an important event in my family history. My grandfather, who was an Italian soldier, was killed in 1944. And so anything that has to do with World War II kind of hits me particularly hard. In fact, I'll share this with you. My grandfather was killed in actually one of the most horrific and infamous events of World War II. It was so well known, in fact, that they made a film out of it called Captain Corelli's Mandolin, which,
Oh, yes, I remember that well.
yeah. So when the war was actually over, German planes heading back to Germany laid siege to a group of Italian soldiers stationed on the island of Cefalonia in Greece. It was a complete massacre. And so it always, anything about World War II really kind of gets me. And so it became doubly important for me to be a part of this project. So, I think about World War II and the soldiers who laid down their lives, and, they fought this incredible battle to essentially give us the second half of the 20th century, which, we sometimes take for granted. Although we're probably at a moment in time now when we might want to pay attention more than ever to what, these kind of battles and what they meant and the lives that we all enjoyed because of it. So yes, this work stayed with me. It stayed with me, and it's, one of the most important things I did this year.
Well, and we're so glad that Garrett M. Graff
Mm.
puts together these works and calls on
Yeah.
the oral tradition that all storytelling is based on. So, well, thank you so much, Edoardo.
Thank you, Michele.
We've been talking with Edoardo Ballerini about When the Sea Came Alive, an oral history of D-Day by Garrett M. Graff, editor, which Edoardo reads along with the author and a full cast. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please return tomorrow for more Best of the Year narrator chats and check out our full list of the 2024 best audiobooks at audiofilemagazine.com. And don't forget, take a moment, rate us in your favorite podcast app so that others are encouraged to give us a listen and to find their next great audiobook. I'm Michele Cobb. Thanks for listening.
Today's episode of Behind the Mic is brought to you by Pay the Piper, a terrifying supernatural horror set in a Louisiana bayou. It's narrated by Sophie Amos, and it's written by legendary director George Romero and author Daniel Kraus. Audible says it's one of the best of the year. That's Pay the Piper.